Hi, everyone, and welcome to VOYAGERCON. I'm really looking forward to this panel on retelling a classic. We have a global panel from all around the world today to talk about various old stories turned into new, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun. My name is Kate Heartfield. I'm an author in Canada, and my next novel, The Embroidered Book, is coming out from HarperVoyager in 2022. Which is a historical fantasy about Marie Antoinette and her sister, Maria Carolina, as rival magicians. So that's the kind of thing that I write about. A lot of old stories, although not necessarily mythological. So perhaps we could start with Sue Lynn, and you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your book.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sue Lynn Tan, the author of Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which is my debut fantasy. I am Chinese, but I was born in Malaysia and I studied in London and France before settling in Hong Kong right now. So my story is inspired by the legend of the Chinese moon goddess Chang'e, and is a story of immortals, legendary creatures, magic, and ultimately is a story of love. I mean, the one sentence pitch would be a young woman's quest to free her mother pits her against the most powerful immortal in the realm.
Jo?
Hi, my name is J.J.A. Harwood. I am the author of The Shadow in the Glass. This is my debut novel. It came out in March this year, and it is a gothic retelling of Cinderella, which I've set in Victorian London, and somehow kind of managed to cross with Dr. Faustus, so I'm quite pleased with myself about that.
And Kester?
Hi, I'm Kester Grant, and I am the author of The Court of Miracles, which you can't see because it's blurred. Hold on, it's so shiny and gold. Court of Miracles is a reimagining of Les Miserables, crossed with the Jungle Book, although there are no animals running around, and that pitch generally just confuses everybody. It's basically taking Les Mis, for those of you who know the story, and making Eponine the main character, and giving her a way better storyline, the kind of storyline that she deserved, rather than the awful one that she gets in the book and in the musical.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Maybe we could stay with you, Kester, and talk a little bit about where the idea for the book came from and how it developed. What was the spark of it when you first started with it?
Well, I've always been obsessed with Les Mis. Every single time I would read or watch the movies, the musical, whoever I was with would then get like this massive diatribe where I was ranting about how awful Marius Pontmercy is and how amazing Eponine is and how she's completely wasted. And as the years went by, I can't remember which version I had just seen, but it just kept, I said to my husband one day, I said, you know, Eponine in the book and in the film, Eponine is the daughter of a thief, and she lives with this very abusive man in this dangerous criminal society. And Cosette gets adopted into that household, and they live together as girls in this really tension-filled, abusive household. And then one of them gets sold to a stranger, and then years later they see each other again. And the only thing they have to say about it is, I knew her once when she was a girl. Meanwhile, it's all about how they've both fallen in love with the same guy. And I just said to my husband, you know, women are not like that. You know, I mean, we would hate each other or love each other or have really complex emotions, but that's not how two females who've grown up in this traumatic environment would interact. And when I thought of that, this vision just came to me in my head, which is not how I write usually. I don't get images in my head, but I just saw Eponine as a teenager hanging off a rooftop in Paris. It was raining and she was exhausted. And she had been searching every single window in the city to try and find the sister, the adopted sister, that had been sold to a stranger. Because in the society that she lives in, if a girl gets sold to a strange man, you know what that kind of means. And so she's so horrified and traumatized by that she will never stop until she finds her. And that was where the story was born, and Eponine came fully formed. And I stole another idea from another Victor Hugo novel called Hunchback of Notre Dame. And Hugo speaks about this urban legend that actually existed in history at the time, that there was a court of miracles, which was basically a mafia, where all the criminals were together in a society that was bound by rules and laws. And I stole that and threw it in the book. So Eponine has grown up as part of this underground society. Meanwhile, Cosette comes in, and there's also the glittering royal court that's going on. But the whole crux of the story is Eponine trying to save her sister from a human trafficker, because I thought, if you grew up amongst criminals, who's the most feared and terrifying criminal of all? If you're a young woman, well, that would be the human trafficker. So that's basically her quest, and she goes through all sorts of stuff to try and make sure her sister is free and to take down the head of the trafficking guild.
Excellent. It's so satisfying. That's great. Joe?
Well, in terms of where I had the inspiration for my novel from, I was never one of those kids who was really like fascinated with the Cinderella story growing up until I came across the version of the story as told by Giambattista Basile in the 17th century. And in this version, what happens is the Cinderella character gets tricked into killing her own stepmother by the woman who goes on to become stepmother number 2. And from that point, the story kind of proceeds along fairly standard traditional Cinderella lines. But she killed her stepmother, and it just blew my mind because I was suddenly obsessed, because I'd always thought of Cinderella as this very good, kind, sweet character who could do no wrong, but she just committed a murder at the beginning of the story and just nobody talked about it. And from there, it all just escalated really quickly. I started thinking, how would Cinderella's pursuit of her goals change if maybe she wasn't quite so morally spotless? And if she had to make some difficult choices to get the things she wanted, how would that have an effect on her as a character? And just, yeah, all just escalated from there.
And Sue Lynn?
Wow. Well, the Legend of Chang'e is one which is very important to my culture. It is one of the origin tales of the Chinese Mid-Autumn Festival, and it's something that, I grew up in as well. According to the legend, basically, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but there were 10 suns rose in the sky, and they were just burning the whole world down. And so the archer Hou Yi, who was a very famous and brave man, he shot down 9 of the 10 suns, and he was gifted the elixir of immortality, but he didn't want to take it because he was married to Chang'e. However, and he loved her very much, and he didn't want to be parted from her and everything, even to become a god and immortal. But as the story goes, she's the one who actually took the elixir from him, drank it, and became a goddess and flew away to the moon. So that is basically the bare bones of the story. There are many versions of it, but the one that I grew up with on was basically about how they had an agreement, how they would share the elixir, but Chang'e broke the agreement because she wanted to become a goddess. And for me, that didn't sit right, because I thought, they love each other. I just thought, she couldn't betray him that easily or anything. And so I started to wonder, what if there was another reason behind it? What if she was scared? What if she was trying to protect someone? What if there was a child and she was trying to protect that child? And so that's the idea that I got for Daughter of the Moon Goddess, a child of Chang'e and Hou Yi that is, born with both of their virtues and their flaws, and who will go on a quest to save her mother.
Wonderful. Maybe we can start with Joe for this one. And if you sort of take a step back and think about how you interact with a story idea, what do you think are some of the hooks that get to you, or the qualities in a story that make that particular story get under your skin and sort of, whisper at you until you write it? Are there certain things that sort of like catch in your brain?
Oh, definitely. I think for me, the one thing which will always make a story really dig its hooks into me is the moments where I look at a character's motivations and decisions, and I just find myself asking why they did that. The more that I question a character's choices, decisions, motivations, the more I find myself thinking about it. And before you know it, the story is already half formed in your head. It's I find that particularly with a lot of fairy tales which I grew up with, you don't always get a huge amount of detail about the character's personality and characterizations. You get sort of like, the good sister and the bad sister, and that's about it. But when I start to ask myself, well, what makes them good, what makes them bad, that's when the wheels set in motion for me.
Sue Lynn?
Well, actually, it's quite similar to what Joe said. I think a lot of the times, like, story gets into me as well when I think about, why a character is doing that. And in the case of the legend, it was basically, I was wondering why she drank the elixir. I mean, there are many versions of the story. Some paint her as a virtuous and brave woman, and some some basically paint her as somebody who just wanted to become immortal. And so I just started questioning all that. And then the idea started forming in my head as well. And I started imagining, you know, her whole story. She's living on the moon alone, and it's very sad and everything. I was wondering, what if there was also someone there who would save her? And not necessarily her husband, Hoi, but you know, the daughter. And I guess it's really strange, but this is a story that has been with me for a really long time. I mean, since I was a girl, celebrating this festival, looking at a mooncake box with a picture of the goddess on the tin and everything. And it just suddenly came to me a lot more often. And one day, you know, the first line of the story and the title just came to my head. And a lot of it just, I guess all these years of thinking about the story just kind of flowed out on the paper. So I guess that's how the story started.
Excellent. And Kester?
Yeah, I think very similarly to what Sue was just saying, the thing is, when you've spent like half your life kind of being obsessed by something and frustrated by the things that annoy you in it, you almost feel when all the pieces kind of come together, you have this moment where you're like, I was born to write this. I am the chosen one, you know.
I can hear the music right now.
Exactly. It's a bit like that. But it was actually an amalgamation of a couple of things, because it's actually crossed with the Jungle Book, which most people don't really see when they read it. But I think it manages to add a layer of richness to the text, because here was the thought. The thought was, there was that Disney remake of Jungle Book where it was kind of like animation. And I watched it, and Jungle Book is one of my favorite stories. I've seen it, I don't know how many times, and yet the movie was so fresh. I thought, how can something that I know so well have been so gripping once again? And I was thinking that Mowgli is this vulnerable human who gets adopted into this really dangerous jungle where everybody could kill him, right? And he learns their laws, and he has to suddenly, he lives according to all of their rules and their laws, and he has this terrible enemy that wants to kill him for reasons, you know, because Shere Khan is whatever, likes to eat people or whatever. But it just suddenly hit me. I was like, that is exactly the same story as Oliver Twist, who gets kidnapped, adopted into this like criminal underworld and has to suddenly, you know, negotiate according. And then, hold on a minute, that's exactly the same story as Cosette, who gets adopted into this crime. And I just saw like this pattern.
Oh my
and
God, you're
that's
right.
where I know, it was like, ah. So as I saw that, that's where the criminal, the Court of Miracles sort of came from. I was like, well, I'm going to take this mafia, and I'm not just going to write it as a mafia. I'm going to write it with the same intricate laws, rules, even the poetry, the way they speak to each other, the language, how they greet each other, is going to be completely different from normal people or from the aristocracy. And it's going to be based on what I read in the Jungle Book. And so I literally pulled all of that and just kind of humanized it. And almost every character, not all of them, but almost everyone actually has a Jungle Book equivalent. So Cosette is Mowgli. The main character, Eponine, Nina, is Bagheera, because Bagheera is the best character in all of Jungle Book. And the human trafficker, their enemy, is Shere Khan, and he's actually called the Tiger. So yeah, it was kind of this, and I've always loved Jungle Book. So it was this kind of melding, this beautiful melding, and I was at the right place at the right time.
So, you know, thinking about that, the language and finding different ways to match things together. You know, one of the things that we do when we are retelling a story is we have, you know, some reference points that we want to work within, but then obviously there's going to be some space, some sort of negative space there to play in and to do your own thing in. So I was curious about that aspect of it. You know, where do you find that space within a story to invent and put your own language, your own world building, whatever it might be. Jo, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I mean, I think certainly for me, looking at Cinderella as an overarching structure, I had the sort of key emotional beats already sort of outlined in the structure of the fairy tale. But luckily for me, a lot of the stuff in terms of like personality and characterization was very, very bare bones. So it was sort of a bit easier to fill that kind of stuff in than it would have been if I was working with something a little bit more modern, where characters' personalities were more clearly defined in the text. In terms of the Faustus side of things, the negative space kind of angle was easy to find there as well, because I don't know how familiar you guys are with Faustus the play, but basically, once Faustus sells his soul, he decides he's going to make all of these like wonderful magical bargains and things like that, and he's going to make himself king of whatever, but he doesn't do anything. He just sort of has some magic powers and just bounces around Europe for like 20 years. Oh, he pranks the Pope, so that's one thing he did. And you know, he doesn't really have any goals. He doesn't really do anything that he set out to do. And so from there, I was like, well, okay, I know what I want my character to do, and that's to have a plan, to have an idea of what she wants out of life and how she's going to get it.
Kester?
It's so interesting because there was Les Mis was, it's one of the, they call it the brick because it literally looked like a brick and you could kill someone with it. So there is so much there. I think it was helpful that instead of taking the main characters of Les Mis generally are known as Jean Valjean and Javert, and they're kind of their nemesis, hate each other, love each other kind of thing. Not love, obsessed. Well, I like obsessed. But I think one thing that was helpful was to move the story away from that and actually take as my main character Eponine and Cosette, who are the younger generation. There's the whole story around them, but they are less, there's actually less about them in the book. And it's so funny how the story can restrain you though. So in my first draft, the one we actually got a publishing deal for, so I was even talking to my editor, and I didn't realize that I could get rid of Marius, who I hate. If no one's noticed, like I hate. I didn't realize this. So originally in my story, there was like all this amazing stuff happening. And then at one point, two girls kind of both like Marius, and then they start getting catty and jealous. And I hated that chapter, but I had to put it in. And I said to my editor, it would be so cool if I could just completely erase Marius and put Enjolras, who's busy always revolutioning and, you know, can't be bothered falling in love with people because he has to save Paris. Instead, it would be way funnier, you know, if there wasn't this love triangle. And she said, well, yeah, why don't you just get rid of Marius? And I was like, oh, goodness, I can do that. So I did, and the story was 100% better. So every scene that had Marius in, I put Enjolras in. And because Enjolras is not really a love interest, he kind of is in my book, like he's very flirty, but he mostly flirts because he wants people to join his fight so they can take over Paris together. But suddenly all these scenes that were like just dry and romantic, but not really, became hilarious because, you know, Enjolras but what's so interesting is that, and then it was only, I think in the fourth draft or something, like in my second edit round, where you're not meant to be changing the story at all, where I suddenly thought, I'm going to do something really super cool with Valjean, which I won't say because it's a big spoiler for the book, you know. But kind of there's these, when you know a story so well, it can be, even though you think, I changed so much about it, I really did. But there's some things in your mind that kind of like blocks, and it could take someone giving you permission to be able to get past them.
Absolutely. Sue Lynn?
Well, someone once asked me like how much license that, you know, you take with the myths, and I'm like, Chang'e and Hou Yi did not have a daughter, so that's kind of the crux of the story here. I mean, the legend, basically, I wanted to keep certain core elements of it. There are many versions of it, but there is always the 10 sons. There is the archer Hou Yi and his beloved wife Chang'e, and there is the elixir and her flying away to the moon. So I wanted to keep, you know, the core elements of it together. But I also wanted a lot of more freedom to, you know, build a whole new story around it, right? With following the character, which, you know, I created, but with the core elements, the themes of the story, with the themes of the original legend, and with the core elements of both parents in it, within her. And so I created this character and a whole quest to save her mother, which is tied to the original original legend. And I created a new world as well. I didn't use the existing gods or anything, but, a world that is still inspired by all the elements of Chinese fantasy, which I fell in love with as a child. I don't know if you've seen any of it, but there's always these beautiful long hanfu clothes, and there's all this music and all this magic around. I wanted to build that into the world with a lot more, creativity, that I could just change things around and not offend anybody as well. So, I mean, that's basically how I approached it. So I wanted to keep certain things core and then just build a whole new world within it as well.
Beautiful. The sort of, I guess the flip side of that question is whether we feel a sense of responsibility when we work with old stories, and if we do, to whom or to what. Sue Lynn, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I mean, I felt a huge responsibility because this legend is one which is really beloved among Chinese people, and I think a lot of people also have started to really know this legend as well. And I guess that's why I wanted to be true to those core elements of it. I mean, this is a legend of my childhood. It's a legend of my friend's childhood as well. My kids who go to kindergarten learn songs about Chang'e flying to the moon. I mean, China has named their lunar exploration program after Chang'e as well. So that's why I really wanted to honor the original legend as well, and still give myself freedom to create something new as well. So.
Kester, do you have a ghost of Victor Hugo haunting you, or do you have any other sort of?
Well, look, Victor Hugo is a very old white guy, so so there wasn't much diversity. Well, there's nothing on the page. He doesn't really describe almost any of his characters by describing their ethnic background at all. You just kind of assume, because of the era it was written in, that everyone is white as well. But I'm Creole Mauritian, so I'm mixed race. I have a lot of family in Paris. I've spent a lot of time there, and so I was really interested to bring in the actual ethnic diversity that you find specifically in Paris. So the first draft of the book, the Miracle Court, although of course the Royal Court, everyone is like shiningly white, as they would be. The Miracle Court, which is the criminal underworld, had all of this kind of mix, which is very specific to France. Like, you'll find different ethnicities there in a way that you won't in other countries. It's certainly not in my country. But then my editor just encouraged me, and she said to me, well, it's fantasy, so why don't you just put everyone in there? And I really love that, because if you look at the history of Paris, as I'm sure a lot of places, but they have a horrifically violent history of oppressing minorities. They're all like, everything's fine, we love everyone, kill all of this group, and oh, suddenly we just hate all of those guys. So I wove into the history of the Miracle Court, I said that it was created as a protection for all of these people who are not just the criminals, but anyone who is ethnically different, religiously different, because also there was this, I mean, in the olden days, it was all Protestants versus Catholics murdering each other in the streets and that kind of thing. So the Miracle Court is a place where everyone is the same, whether you're a man or a woman, no matter what color your skin is, no matter what religion, there is no race, and everyone is actually, their whole identity and their culture comes from the guild that they belong to. So the Thieves Guild actually has a way of talking and acting completely differently from the Assassins Guild, for instance. And that was really important to me because as a mixed race person growing up, I didn't see myself in anything that I read. And my island, there were no natives on my island. It was colonizers that came and brought slaves and indentured laborers from Africa and from India. And there's a lot of undercurrent racist issues amongst the culture. So people don't intermarry here, that kind of thing. They don't even hang out. You wouldn't go to the same parties or birthday parties. Certain people wouldn't be invited, because you're not the right color. That kind of thing happens a lot here. And so it was really important to me to be able, I think it was kind of like a response in anger, to be able to create a place where my main character, Nina, who is mixed race, where she is actually judged, and everyone's opinion of her come from what she is and what she does rather than who she is physically, because that's such a reality of where I live in Mauritius, and it was clearly a reality in Paris at the time.
Wonderful. Joe, what about your sense of responsibility, if you have one, to whom?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I suppose for me, it's not so much a sense of responsibility working with the Cinderella story as it is a sense of awe, because like the Cinderella story goes back so long that, and it's been retold by so many different cultures in so many different places around the world, that it's quite difficult to pick out one particular society and be like, yes, this belongs to them. But in a way, that's awe-inspiring and humbling, because you look at all of these different versions of the same story and you see the footsteps of all of the storytellers who've come before you, and it's a really wonderful thing, but also quite scary. Do sometimes wonder if I'm doing it wrong.
So when we're working with a retelling, one of the things that we're doing is trying to tell a story that will work for those people that know the Cinderella story inside and out and have, you know, read every single version, or J.J.A, or you know, I've seen Les Mis 20 times. So we have those people in mind, you know, but we also wanted ideally to be able to work for a reader who's coming to those old stories for the first time as well, and to serve as almost a gateway to those stories. So what were some of the keys for you in writing for both of those readerships? Maybe Kester, we can start with you.
It's a pretty, that was always in my mind, because the Les Mis fan community are hardcore and they get very angry.
Yeah.
They get really upset. I misnamed one of them, Marius's friends, one of the La Société des, I can't even remember their name, but the boys that are all like revolution. I misnamed one of them, and then I forgot to. I had a staff that I had to check that was the right one. That was the one who was a doctor, and he only appears like once and says one thing, really. But I actually had someone in a review being like, well, if it doesn't bother you that Combeferre's name is Jolie in this book, then I'm sure you might enjoy it. but what I love doing is, because I'm such a Les Mis fan, is putting Easter eggs in. So at one point, someone gets shot. If you know Les Mis, someone gets shot and they're in someone else's arms and it starts to rain, and one of them starts to sing about flowers growing, and the other person slaps them. It's like, what are you singing right now? So anyone who knows the Les Mis musical will know exactly where that's from. So I had all these like little Easter eggs here and there for the fans, which could still be kind of you wouldn't really understand the fullness of the joke, but you still find it funny. But Les Mis has got such a huge cast, and my book actually does have a massive cast as well. So I tried my best to keep it completely fresh, so that anyone could pick it up and enjoy it as a kind of a fantasy with a huge cast of people, and that it would make sense. I don't know how well I succeeded. I hope I succeeded. My feeling is that maybe it was okay, although there were some reviews that were like, how many people does this book have? But one thing that was great was that a lot of, and that's where I thought, yes, I've succeeded at something, that a lot of people after reading it said, you know, I really want to go watch Les Mis now, or I really want to go read it. And these were people who had been intimidated by the size of the actual, you know, the non-shortened book, or had never watched it for various reasons. So that was quite exciting. I think I stopped reading reviews after a certain amount of time, because they're not good for you psychologically. But I know I had at least 25 people saying that they were going to actually go and watch Les Mis or read it, and they were excited to do so. And so I was like, yes, join my kingdom of people that hate Marius Courmercy.
Did you get any pushback on the Marius thing from the fans, or was it all just the little tiny details?
What do you believe? I mean, he's a main character who everyone is in love with. Not one person was like, where is Marius? This book really needs Marius, which goes to show that he's awful and everybody hates him.
He just lifts right out. Yeah.
I was quite indifferent to him.
Yeah.
He was like,
Yeah, I don't think he left much of an impression on me either. It's just like, oh, you're here as well. Okay.
He harmonizes well. That's the whole deal with Marius.
That's true, he does.
Sue Lynn, what about you for writing for people who are familiar with the story and not familiar? How did you balance that?
Well, it's kind of an interesting one because I'm working with a legend that is, that is pretty well known among my people and everything. But on the other hand, I'm basing it on a different main character. And I was just telling this to my friend the other day that the title of the book is Daughter of the Moon Goddess. But I'm sure I'm going to get comments once it goes out like, why is not the Moon Goddess the main character? I'm sure that's going to happen. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to integrate the original legend still, not in a way that's being told, but in a way where the main character, Xingyan, actually experiences it and lives it, right? So there is the original legend in it. It does come in like, a fair amount and everything. And I want to do it in such a way where people who are familiar with the story don't feel impatient because, it's actually integrated into the story. And people who don't know the legend will also learn about it in this way as well. And I also, for those who love the story and the moon goddess and everything, the world that I built is a new world, but I also brought in like little elements which I knew were very core to this, like osmanthus flowers on the moon, and themed colors of like white and silver, and all the immortals flying on clouds and everything. So that is also like a really important part of the story. I mean, for transport. So I mean that's pretty much what I did on that.
Excellent. And Jo, what about you writing for readerships that were familiar with it and readerships that maybe weren't as familiar?
Well, I think the most important thing for me, which I had to remember when I was writing my book, was that I wasn't telling Cinderella's story, I was telling Eleanor's story. And although obviously my main character, Eleanor, is a Cinderella analog, and you can definitely like see the points where I'm being like, look, this is a reference to the original story. She's very much her own person with her own set of goals. And there's a real gulf between Cinderella, who's very kind and sweet and good, and Eleanor, who's not. And I think being able to like drill down into Eleanor's personality and what made her tick, I would hope made enough of a difference between, put enough distance between my book and the Cinderella fairy tale so that people who weren't as familiar with it would be able to enjoy it on its own merits.
Excellent. One of the things that always interests me about working with stories is the way that we can kind of take bits of them and use them almost like pieces of language, like the classic Star Trek episode Dharma Congelata Tanagra, or if we for meme culture now, if we say distracted boyfriend, anyone who's far too much online understands what that means, or grumpy cat or whatever. So it seems like there's the stories can be almost a really quick shorthand to say something. You say Cinderella and that's almost an immediate way of explaining what you mean to somebody. So how do you work with those pieces of language as an author and recognize that stories are going to say something to someone, that there is an immediate reaction to Cinderella as a concept, for example, and sort of work with that without but also have some freedom within that, which is a bit of a vague question. But Jo, if you understand what I mean, how did you find working with those sort of assumptions and the things that readers bring, knowing that lexicon already in a way?
Sure. Well, I think definitely because Cinderella is such an old story, the lexicon has kind of been like updating itself over time. Like Cinderella doesn't necessarily need to have a glass slipper to be Cinderella. That's actually quite a recent detail. I think it's Perrault who came up with that, which is about 300 years old. Almost certainly got the date wrong, please don't quote me. But I think that working with a story where readers are always going to have a certain amount of pre-existing expectations as an author kind of makes it a bit easier for you to subvert them, because you know where people are expecting you to go and you can just be like, aha, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go this way instead. In terms of the structure, having a sort of very well-known fairy tale to work with meant that all of the sort of key emotional beats were laid out for me like signposts, and they pointed me in the direction that the overall shape of the story was going to go, but I could decide how I was going to get there under my own steam and take as long or as quickly as I wanted. And it was quite daunting knowing that people would be coming in expecting me to do certain things. But on the other hand, it gave me such a lot of things to play with. So yeah, it was a bit tricky, but overall I found myself really enjoying it.
You know, it was one of the sort of phrases that we use that comes from stories is, you know, down the rabbit hole. So I thought, well, you know, that's something that we are familiar with as authors and as researchers. So Sue Lynn, was there any research rabbit hole that really, you know, ate one of your evenings or was a whole lot of fun? I'm sure there are a million of them, but what's one of them that stands out to you?
Well, first of all, Daughter of the Moon Goddess is a fantasy. Yay. We're not historical novels, so there was some flexibility there. But, you know, I did want to ensure that certain important elements were as authentic as possible. Yin is the daughter of Ho Yi, the most famous archer in the world, basically. And so I spent a lot of time researching archery. So firstly, it was like researching, you know, what the ancient bows in China were made of, like there was horn, layers of wood, mulberry, bamboo, and they were wrapped in silk and lacquered. Okay, I'm not going to bore you guys with this anymore. And also, like, I also studied like the different postures of, you know, like the ancient Chinese armies, like how they're told to hold the bow and how straight their back needs to be and how everything needs to be aligned. And this is my favorite part. I was also listening very closely to the sound because there were a lot of arrows flying around. So I wanted to be able to describe that really well. So I spent a lot of time on YouTube watching videos of people shooting arrows. And there's this one Chinese fantasy drama called The Untamed. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's amazing. I love it. And the protagonist is this guy called Wei Wuxian. And there's this one scene when there are 5 target boards out there and he draws 5 arrows because, you know, 1 or 2 is just not good enough. And he shoots all of them and they all strike the board, of course. And so I watched that an embarrassing number of times. And I also watched Legolas from Lord of the Rings as well. So that was probably my favorite part of research. And I've ruined all my credibility now.
No, I understand. Kester, did you have a favorite research rabbit hole, or maybe not so favorite?
I can't even remember because there was so much research to do. I did so much research, and I still got people saying there's 2 things apparently. So I did a lot of research on the era, what the streets would have been like. I mean, everything from where the prison was. I literally took the map of Paris at the time and I actually used real roads and things. And I was like, you can't even make this stuff up. This road is called Murder Road. That road is called Everyone Dies Road.
Yes.
but I did so much research. And at one point, Nina ends up in the royal. She's a thief. She's a member of the Thieves Guild. She ends up in the royal palace in the Tuileries. And in the room where all the treasure is, sorry, I'm forgetting all my words. I'm pregnant, I have pregnancy brain. I don't even know how to speak anymore. So she ends up with all of these treasures. And I was thinking of treasures and I thought of a couple of things and I thought of a Fabergé egg. And I looked up every single thing. And I was like, okay, well, actually, Fabergé didn't start making the eggs till after the date in which this book is set. And the date comes from Les Mis, so I can't really change that because it's based on actual historical events that happened. I think it was the June uprising. So then I looked more into the egg, and apparently the idea of Fabergé eggs came before, and there were in royal households that had been made, but there wasn't a brand behind it, if you see what I mean. So I thought, well, they did exist before. They were based on others that were found in the royal courts of Russia and whatever. So I'm just going to put it in because also there's a fantasy novel, you know, and I can do what I want. Let me tell you about how I can't do what I want. How so many people say to me, Fabergé eggs, this book is great, but Fabergé eggs were not around, and those kinds of historical details really make a big difference. And I mean, I spent literally probably a month, and I created what I called an encyclopedia. And the encyclopedia was everything about what kind of vendors were on the streets, when was the street. In my first draft, I was like, the street was silent. And then when you research, like, no street in Paris is ever silent because there are always people coming in and out in different times of day and stuff going on. And I had lists of the rivers, the prisons, the doors, the gate. I mean, everything. I created this massive thing, and I actually had to stop myself and say, okay, stop, write the book, which I then did. And then according to each chapter, go into your encyclopedia, or then you can research further, because otherwise you'll never stop researching. And after all that, people are still like, those Fabergé eggs, this is inauthentic, this book. And apparently there's a map at the front of the book, which I didn't create, which was based off an actual antique map, which is the one I worked off. And apparently there's some error in it. I don't know what the error is, but people in the comments, they know what the error is. And they're holding me responsible for that also.
Yes, I'm dreading this when my historical fantasy comes out soon. I'm sure there'll be something. And Fabergé eggs are, I went down a Fabergé egg rabbit hole, not for that book, but for something else. And yeah, because then you want to read about everyone and what happened to them and the mystery of where they are now. And yeah, that's a whole day. Joe, how about you for research rabbit holes?
Oh, so many of them. I was like you, Kester. I could not stop myself from researching until I had to be like, no, stop it. Ah, God. But the one which really sticks with me is when I was researching Victorian London, in one of my books, I came across a list of excuses given by clerks who'd taken their work home with them but hadn't finished it. And it's great because you get things like, I couldn't work because it was too hot, it was too cold, I had a row with my wife. And my favorite one, the landlord's son stole my work and threw it away, and I totally would have done it otherwise, you guys, I would have done it. And that's all just like the dog ate my homework, isn't it? It was a really nice little reminder that no matter how far back you go, like there's always going to be something that we'll have in common with people in the past, and that's giving your boss terrible excuses.
That's awesome. So for the final question, I just want to make sure that I haven't missed anything I really wanted to mention, but I haven't. So if we could just let people know where they can find you on the internet, and if you have anything coming out or coming up that you want to mention to people, feel free to do that. Kester?
You can find me at kestergrant.com, Kester Grant. And I have Court of Miracles 2 because it's a trilogy, and that is coming out next year from HarperVoyager. And I do have a middle grade coming out, but with everything that's happened right now, things are delayed, that I could not tell you the date. But Court of Miracles 2. Yay. Next year.
Yay. Sue Lynn.
Well, I have Daughter of the Moon Goddess coming out. It's not out yet. It will be out on January 2022, and I'm also going to be working on the sequel, which is also going to be coming out later in the year. And you can find me online on Instagram, on Twitter at Sue Lynn Tan, and on my website as well.
Excellent. And pre-orders are available, I think, right?
Yes. The US cover just got released and everything, so the whole weekend has been a blur, and my mind is kind of shot. And this is my first panel, so thank you for bearing with me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, I never would have guessed.
No, I think you could have.
And Joe, where can people find you and anything you've got coming up?
Well, I can't talk about some of my upcoming projects at the moment because my hair's full of secrets right now. But I have a blog called Joe Writes Stuff. I update once every 2 weeks, and it's very rarely serious. And I'm also on Twitter and Instagram at J.J.A. Harwood. So feel free to come say hi.
Excellent. And people can find me on Twitter far too often as Kate Heartfield. And my book, The Embroidered Book, is coming out next year. Thank you so much, everybody. This was wonderful, and I love all your books, and I hope people go out and read them very soon.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.